3, 2, 1, and we're live.
All right.
So, today I have Arlene Santos with me. She's the current executive director of the Institute of Politics and Governance, IPG. And, well, your organization is really one of the organizations in the Philippines that's championing innovative concepts such as sustainable and social cities. I'm sure that's something we will be talking about. And of course also working on issues such as renewable energy, decent work, gender justice, just to name a few. So I'm very happy to have you. It's been quite some time that I wanted to invite you on the podcast, so I'm happy that you're here today.
Okay, thank you for having IPG, having me here.
Exactly. So why don't we start off, why don't you, I mean, I gave this short introduction, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit more to the audience and just tell us how you, well, what you did before IPG, what's your interest, your advocacy, and how you got to where you are right now.
Okay, very short. I started in the student movement in early 80s. At the time, it was still Marcos time. So that's where I began my activism. And then, after student organizing, I went to poor farmers organizing in Luzon. So I stayed in that work in an NGO for, 18 years.
Wow.
And after that, I went to direct political work, part of those who founded Akbayan Citizens Action Party.
Okay.
So became full-time there for another 12 years. And then, going full circle, I went back last 2017 to NGO work, and that's where I am now, at the Institute of Politics and Governance. So along those travel and journeys, we are now in IPG. The work that we do, somehow reflects all the advocacies that I went through from the very beginning.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's for you, it's like you said, coming full circle. So it must be. I mean, you can use all the experiences and try to, do something useful with that. That must be good. But I mean, I'm wondering. So, how would you describe actually IPG's mission? What is your core objective?
Well, IPG was established since 1994. So it's our 25th anniversary, silver anniversary this year.
Nice.
And from the very beginning, IPG's core work is working with LGUs in pursuing participatory democracy, participatory governance. And that includes also women and politics and governance, health governance, but basically deepening democracy through citizens' participation in governance. So we maximized before when the law was passed, the local government code, where it provided spaces for people's participation. So until now we're doing that. Still very, very relevant, especially
Absolutely.
during this challenging time.
Yeah. So how can I imagine your work on a day-to-day basis? So you go and meet up with local government officials and kind of do trainings with them. Is that kind of...
Yes, capacity building
Right.
of reform-oriented local government officials, and also capacity building focusing on women politicians.
Right.
And also women in communities who wants to enter politics and governance. So we want to improve, not only increase the number of women in politics and governance, but also to develop their capacities for a more qualitative participation and intervention. So but also we partner with the civil society organizations and community-based organizations, because when we talk about participatory governance, we don't just talk about local government. We also talk about active citizens, that have a stake, who's also a stakeholder must have a stake in governing also. So we partner also with organizations so that they can meaningfully participate in avenues and spaces for people's participation.
Well, that's definitely interesting and useful. So you're also kind of a bridge builder between the different
Yes, yes.
constituents and the stakeholders. Yeah. So I'm like going back to what you said about like women's participation in especially local. I mean, like on the local government level. I mean, if I look at the, statistics, so to speak, in the region, the Philippines seems to be not only in Asia, by the way, one of the countries where gender justice is rather good. But I guess we have to put an asterisk on that. So there's definitely also lots of there's a lot of room for improvement, obviously. So what is your experience like? Is it for women, is it difficult to become to work in politics? I mean, what is the kind of like the challenges, and how does it look like?
Well, generally speaking, Philippine politics is still a macho terrain. No? It's predominantly male, and women in politics and governance have to work harder, to prove themselves, and there is not yet programmatic, proactive, institutionalized program, unlike in other first world countries, modern countries, that they have incentives for political parties, like gender quota in the political parties, for example. We don't have that yet in the Philippines, those proactive institutionalized program for women. So it's still a challenge, considering also that the traditional politics here, it's basically very, what you call it, very male dominated still, even though we had 2 women presidents. It doesn't mean that it is reflected in the culture and real power down to localities.
Right. And so what are some of the issues? I mean, besides the fact that you do want to have more women in politics, obviously, and just have a more equal representation, I guess. But what will be like and equal chances, of course. But what will be like some core issues that maybe that women feel strongly about that and maybe not very well represented?
Well, one of the work that we do is which is relatively a new program for around 2 years, is on gender responsive budgeting, for example.
Okay.
So in connection, for example, with the Safe City project that we do until now, since 2017. So in terms of women legislators, for example, at the local level, or women politicians pushing for more budget for to respond to gender-based violence, like sexual harassment in public spaces, on violence against women issues. So that's an area that women politicians, women in governance are have a big space, to give their push, in terms of advocacy and concrete programming at the local level.
I see. And the gender responsive budgeting, is that about allocating resources?
Yes,
in a way
yes,
that
public fund,
Right.
and also participatory planning to invite women organizations and other vulnerable sectors like women or person with disabilities, for example, LGBT, so that their concerns will be part of the planning and the budgeting of local government.
Right. And I think also the concept of safe spaces is quite important, no? Can you maybe explain a little bit how that comes into play?
Well, especially in urban areas, where social city is actually what it's about, in issues of urbanization. So even we partnered with United Nations Women from the very beginning. Until now, we have partnership with the UN Women Trust Fund in continuing this program on safe cities. Basically, it's creating safer public spaces for women and girls and other vulnerable sector. Luckily, we have a national law now, it just passed this year. But when we started doing it, it's more on local. No? So
Right.
we, in partnership with our champions in the city of Manila, the Philippine capital, we're able to pass an ordinance on safe public spaces. But the challenge there, actually creating policies, we think, based on our experience and even the experience of UN Women in other cities globally, it's the easiest part. The more challenging part is the behavioral change.
Yeah.
So the awareness building, media work like social media work, and public awareness work is equally important, no, with the policy work, because gender-based violence is really cultural and mindset, and so those are the challenges. And women's organization, LGBT organizations working hand in hand with local politicians, that's the most effective combination in terms of strategy.
I mean, like, and if you look at, the young generation, or young generations, I guess, millennials and even younger ones, I mean, like, do you see any cultural change already when it comes to, like, women's rights, etc.? Is there more natural awareness, so to speak, because they're exposed to those ideas, maybe also more through social media, etc.? Or do you see, like, that some of the bad habits kind of linger? I mean,
Well, based on our experience, I will talk based on our experience in terms of having orientations, dialogues with different people. The younger they are, the more conscious they are
Right.
on sexual harassment issues. No, so I think the exposure also in social media and being aware of some politically correct, what is the politically correct attitude, or that you should not harass people even online, etc. So the younger generations are more, what do you call the millennial term, woke,
Yeah.
in a way. So that gives us hope, no? In fact, in our campaign in Antipolo, in Manila, it's the youth sector who's doing the social media campaign.
Right.
On safe cities, safe streets, safe spaces, anti-sexual harassment in public spaces.
Oh, that's very good. I mean, like, because you brought up this term woke, me personally, I'm like kind of skeptical or critical of that, because it's, on the one hand, it's very good, of course, that you have raised awareness among young people for those kind of critical issues, but I think cancel culture and those kind of things, that really, there's again also a flip side to being woke, I guess, where it's less tolerant, and where you even, especially in universities, I don't know if that applies to the Philippines as much as it does to the United States and also Europe, where like, I don't know, some academics that are considered not politically correct are not allowed to speak anymore, those kind of things, where certain ideas or opinions are being excluded from the discourse because they don't fit into a particular worldview. So I think that's a negative side of being woke. So, but I think in terms of, if there is a general awareness and tolerance, and kind of like openness, then of course that's what we want. So that's
and
a good
it's
thing.
all generation
Right,
generation are responsible. I mean, have the responsibility to bridge, because I remember in the social media now the baby boomer and the millennial dynamics. Yes, we are reading many things about it now, and it's creating somehow a toxic interaction among generation. I think we should also bridge that and have a more open conversation rather than
Absolutely,
judgment. No, rather than
absolutely.
judgment.
Mm. I mean, you mentioned the term social city, so it's also an important concept that you're championing, right? So what does it mean, and how does it relate to the probably more well-known term smart cities?
Okay. Uh, well, social city. It was the Frederick Ebert Stiftung who inspired us to go into this, and well, at least the term and the framework originated from Germany. 1999, I think. It's an urban planning paradigm when it started to address exclusion in urbanizing, modernizing communities, and also gentrification. So when we started talking about FES and IPG started talking about social city, and perhaps we can start it doing some advocacy, some work here in the Philippines. We see the relevance of it because we have a problem we have many urban issues. Basically, we see it as when we say social city, it's about inclusivity in urban development. It's about sustainability also, people's participation in urban planning and where the urbanization, the direction of urbanization, who will being inclusive in terms of who will benefit from the development, from the fruits of urbanization and development. To simply put, I summarize it during our first social city conference here in the Philippines as no one should be left behind. For me, that's a core value that in terms of social city. And of course, it's very complex. Issues of urbanization very complex. You have mobility, you have sustainability, you have housing issues, you have social services issues. So basically, that's the simplest way I can put it, no, in terms of in social city in our context, because it came from Germany. When we were talking about it, starting talking about it last year, we said we will make it our own, because Germany had different context. No? When we talk about gentrification in Germany, it's different context here. So it's more on decent work, dignified housing. It's still connected, but the degree of the problem and is different, and other issues are more complicated in Germany than here, and then some issues are more complicated here than in Germany.
No, I guess of course those kind of like theoretical frameworks or terms that are being used, you have to adapt them to the local context, of course. And, okay, I mean, again, and speaking of the challenges, I mean, if you look at a huge city like Manila, right, which was built for, I don't know, like 1 million people or something, and we have how many? 16? What are the
16
latest figures?
cities. What?
How many million people are living here now? It's like
In the whole of Metro Manila?
Yeah. It's like,
oh wow, I'm not updated, but
what is it
16,
like? Anybody Googling? It must be like, it depends on how you count it. Like, what is it, 60 million?
60 million.
Anyway, far more than what it was planned for, no?
Yeah. And there was no planning in the first place.
And there was no planning in the first place. So is there any like concerted attempts of tackling issues of transportation, for example? I mean, this is such a hassle here every day, and everybody, I mean, everybody is complaining about it for a reason.
The traffic and everything. During our first social city conference, we invited the chairperson of the housing committee in Congress, Congressman Albi Benitez, and he was very what do you call this? Critical when he said that our urban plan is based on the 1960s plan. And this is the chairman of the housing committee in Congress. Right. So many things were not projected, no, mass transportation, population increase, etc. Unlike what we were able to see in Berlin Leipzig.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That they plan 100 years from now. I mean, when they plan the train station, for example, it can still accommodate the projected population growth 100 years from today, for
Yeah,
example.
yeah.
So we don't have that here. But we have, during our social city conferences where we try to convene urban planners, urban poor organizations also, and other experts from the academe, CSOs, etc. They're saying that there are growing advocates, even inside government, that wants a more comprehensive, proactive, strategic urban planning. At this point, there's no, what do you call it, sort of centralized planning, for example, in Metro Manila, on how to address strategically the urban issues that we're confronting, like traffic and housing and flooding, for example.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So each city cannot address problem of traffic individually, because
Exactly.
the roads are
So
interconnected, no? So it must be a comprehensive approach and holistic approach. So
yeah, and of course also like the ones at the bottom of the of society, so to speak, they are the marginalized, the underprivileged. They are the ones who are suffering the most.
True.
You know, and of course if you try to improve the current system, that also they need to be somehow be included in that process, because otherwise
True.
whatever you do, they will still be left behind, no, when it comes to transportation, etc. And then I don't know, like you don't provide space for housing nearby, then you will have the same issues, especially for the ones who with no voice, no.
True, if you keep on relocating informal settlers, urban poor, outside their jobs, outside the schools, far from hospitals and schools and livelihood, you're just making them poorer. So the problem is will just worsen.
Exactly.
And at the same time, if you do not bring development outside the congested, concentrated city in Metro Manila, more people will come here to look for better livelihood. Actually, it's an old problem. The problem is there's no strategic, not only in this government, even previous government. So.
Well, I also would be guessing it's an old problem. Nothing has been really done.
There are some attempts, but not really.
Yeah. And then at the same time, you have like new, or well, not really new, but like worsening overall problems, such as climate change, where
True.
I mean this must have also quite a considerable impact on. Again, especially the urban poor, for example, like when there is a flood, they will be the first ones,
in the danger zones, especially near rivers. And,
So how does that factor in this whole idea of social cities, climate change mitigation? What are the
our last social city activity this year was in Cebu recently, and it's the activity that focuses on sustainable or green development and safe spaces for women and girls. No? So we did it in Cebu just last month. So what we did is different teams, but that we want to consolidate next year. So it's an issue of sustainability because the development, the urban development, if we will not factor in as an overarching framework, the green factor or the sustainability or the environment factor, climate change factor, even the development will be affected. It will not be sustainable, and it's more expensive, to run cities, and it's costly for the people living in it, especially the poor, because they have lesser capacity and resources to adapt. To adapt to the different negative effect of climate change. So, but the challenge here is Advocacy is not enough. It's important. Networking and having a constituency among different sectors for social city. The different component of social city, by the way, is not new, no? Because there are organizations and sector working on dignified housing, for example.
Yeah.
There are sectors like the labor group working for decent jobs, and there are groups working on climate issues, etc. The beauty of social city is it's trying to connect this into one development framework in urban setting. So it's very important that we create a bigger network and a stronger network to advocate for this. But the key also here is for duty bearers, the government, from the national executive to the the legislative branch, to the local government. So unless there's a joint effort there, it will be it's quite impossible, no, to to reach that goal, no, in terms of a development framework in our urban cities. So the potential there is the potential is there, and I think in this coming 2022 election, it should be a platform agenda, no, consciousness raising among voters, especially for urban poor voters, that hey, vote somebody who have an urban development planning, who's participatory, who's inclusive, who's, you know, well.
Congressman was saying, like, plans from the 60s, you know, I guess also vested interests when it comes to properties, etc., etc. So it sounds like a very, and at the same time, this kind of overarching, you know, worsening situations, climate change, of course, also social inequality, etc. So huge issues, very complex. And how do you, I mean, you kind of answered it a little bit already by saying, like, yeah, you need to work on different levels, right? Advocacy, yeah, like more like on the, let's say, between stakeholders and working on the grassroots level even, but also like a top-down approach where you work with the relevant policy makers, try to lobby, provide them with, you know, good plans for their policy proposals, etc., so that they can hopefully, you know, pass laws that and initiatives that are helpful. But so what are concrete steps? How, you know, how can we? What do you think is the best strategy to, you know, further those goals? I mean,
well, what we are starting to do is localizing the initiative. Of course, we will not give up. We will not. We will not do national advocacy work, yeah, but at the local level, in one of the focus of our social city initiative. By the way, Johannes, it's not only IPG. So yeah, we work with different organizations, Institute of Popular Democracy, IPD, Kilusang Maralita, Bayan, and other CSOs working in urban areas and housing issues, environment, gender, etc. So it's a multi-stakeholder initiative also from the CSO part. One of our focus now, because of this mega project by the Philippine National Railway, there will be a mega train that will cut across NCR to Northern Luzon, NCR to Southern Tagalog. And we know that the TOD, the transport-oriented development, is going to happen with the train stations going to rural areas, for example. So what we're doing now is we chose 2 localities in Laguna that will be part of the train project, and try to influence in a way with reform-oriented government official there, with the social city frame. And that means we want that the development that will that the train will bring, the stations will bring to these localities, instead of just talking to owners of malls and developers. It should be participatory also in considering the urban poor communities, the medium size businesses, and all the other components of social city. So in that way, in terms of strategy, we want to see, even in smaller cities, somehow some concretization of the urban planning paradigm, so that in our advocacy, we have evidence that this is better, that this is working. So instead of just waiting for something to happen at the national level, which is quite difficult, especially now. But so we have to have some gains at the local level that we can show as proof, as evidence that this is a better urban development paradigm. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, otherwise I guess people think, it's all good ideas, but they can never do it anyway, or it's like it stays an academic, theoretical debate, and it makes a lot of sense to me to try to have some case examples where things work, where you can say, look, if we made it happen here, and you see the results, and we can also do it in, say, Metro Manila eventually, So I think that's a promising strategy. So what are the case examples that you're working on right now?
This is not directly work of IPG, but also, with regards to social city, still in social city. For example, the Institute of Politics and Governance in Kilusang, Maralita is doing for how many years now the people's planning, wherein the communities, urban poor communities that are for relocations, they are the one who's before it was allocated a budget, but now there's no budget, but they're still continuing. They're the ones looking for lands for developers and the plan for their relocation. So that's another way of localizing it, concrete gains, as an evidence that it is better done that way. Sorry, what's the last question?
What were some promising case examples where you're basically already trying to have some model projects?
So that's I mentioned earlier that two cities in Laguna, but we started in Cabuyao. Well, it's an ongoing Cabuyao City. So it's a big city also. So we're starting to they were part of the previous conferences also with LGUs when we had our social city discussion on transport-oriented development. And so we continue by localizing it. And that means also for the providing technical assistance in terms of planning and program development. Of course, with the social city framework. And we plan also to bring urban planners who can help advise and guide the local government in terms of their development plan and planning.
I'm just wondering, are you working in those places because they need a lot of development? I mean, because they're, expanding those cities, or is it because the government officials are open to those ideas, or both? Or
all of the above. We need, IPG, when we choose a particular area, as a criteria, there are many factors. But the first factor is the local chief executive is reform-oriented, and we share some common values. Because if not, it will be superficial. So that's one. And second, because the train, the mega, because of the transport-oriented development and social city frame, we chose Cabuyao and then San Pablo.
Okay, and so, for example, what would be the milestones or the time frame you're looking at for Kabuyao? Is there like a roadmap somehow? Okay, the next year we want to do this, and then.
Well, we had a roundtable discussion with the LGU just recently. Today's November, last October. So next year, we will be doing partnership in terms of gender responsive budgeting and safe cities work in Kabuyao. And also, we will be bringing urban planners that who shares common values and social city framework, of course, with us to help them in their development plan. So that's what, in terms of localization of the social city framework, that's our direction next year. But with regards to the network, we plan to we have a technical working group on the social city initiative from the very beginning. Different CSOs with IPT and CSOs and other organizations working in urban issues. So we will continue that and plan going to 2022 on how to popularize more and bring social city issues in the mainstream at the national level while doing local work. So that's the direction, at least for next year, and then going to 2022. And I think if IPG will push for the network or the technical working group to make these issues an electoral issue in 2022 as a basis for people in terms of who to vote for at the local, especially at the local level. So.
That's interesting. So what is I would be interested in hearing, like, what are the, for example, urban poor, how are they responding to those ideas, and what's the feedback you're getting from the people that are affected, actually?
Well, there are many technical issues that we need to popularize in order to bring it at the community level. We are not there yet. So we need materials, and that's why we're also doing a write-up in consolidating all the informations and the result of the different activities, and hopefully for publication next year. FES is also supporting that write-up. And hopefully from there, we will popularize the result of that write-up so that we can bring it at the community level. So that's another direction for next year.
Okay, sounds like you will have a lot of work ahead of you.
Yes. Among other things also.
Yeah, among other things. Okay, so speaking about social cities a bit more, so I'm wondering also, is there any examples abroad, for example? I mean, you've been to Germany and mentioned the German example. Is there any positive, like role models, so to speak, like that you can look to?
Of course, Germany. It's where the concept, the planning paradigm started. Yes, we've been to through the partnership with FES again, together with representative from 8 countries. So we are all 9 people from 9 countries who are partnered with FES. With, of course, Berlin, and we went to Berlin. We're able to see housing cooperatives, the transport system. There's an organization of all the train companies where they explain to us how the mass transportation started and how it worked. And also Leipzig, Leipzig, yes, where they try to show us how they plan and how the concerns of the communities are being brought up at the city level, so that the city can respond to. So yes, and also smart cities.
Yeah.
Of course, smart cities. Well, smart cities in Berlin We had a meeting there, and uh, I see, no, well, I think in IPG we have discussions on this. We see the smart city concept is useful, but not as the overall frame.
Yeah.
It is a good instrument for modernization, uh, and also um, it can be used for inclusion, for example. But it is not the development frame, the overarching development frame. So, and it's of course it's the level of Germany and like Berlin and Leipzig and the Philippines is still uh, wide apart. But there are elements that we saw in Germany that can inspire, well, at least it must inspire urban planners and advocates like us to do here in the Philippines.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, like if you speak about public transport and housing in Berlin, I'm sure if you ask the average person in Berlin, they will tell you this is not going in the best way they could. And I think even like if I remember correctly, last time I was in Berlin, like you see those big self-ironic advertisements on buses and subways, where
True,
basically
true.
like the public transportation
Yeah,
agency is basically saying, look, we're always late and and so
True.
making a joke about themselves, kind of. But it's yeah, but I guess if you compare it to here, I mean, many things are working out quite well, and at least there's an awareness and also like like an ongoing discourse with including representatives of of I don't know, associations of people who live in different neighborhoods, etc. That are concerned about. Just to mention one issue about when we had a couple of years back this Airbnb issues, where people basically were concerned about just regular apartments being turned into commercial, essentially hotels. Like or not really hotel, but like essentially like commercial projects, so to speak, and then that changed the quality of whole neighborhoods because the rents would raise, etc. So many issues like that. But then at least there was there's maybe the avenues to voice criticism against that, and then to see change also. That they're much more transparent and easier than here. I mean.
Yeah, the people we talk to, they're very candid and honest about it on the issues also. But of course, we came from third world country, and we were very impressed and everything. But the discussions was also candid and frank. And they mentioned about people are really complaining about the how the prices of rent increased, no? Because also of migration, more people coming in Berlin, so the demand for housing is also increases. So what we talked to there, the cooperative, the housing cooperative, they are the cheapest, they said. And that's offering, but the waiting line, for example, is very long. So in terms of accessing, so they want to expand also. And that's also a good model in terms of here in the Philippines, housing cooperative. There are some small initiative on that's ongoing, started before by civil NGO workers, for example. And I think it can be replicated here based on our own realities, of course.
And I mean, because you mentioned the ideas behind smart cities, with technological innovation and like making basically including lots of new technologies in cities, connectivity, wireless, etc. everywhere, and new generation of the 5G being introduced, and I guess all those kind of related issues, but also then of course when it comes to manufacturing and those kind of ideas, no? So, but I'm guessing that what you've tell me yourself, but I'm guessing the problem you're having with this term, or could have with this term, is that the focus is not really on the people as much as it is maybe on businesses.
Yeah.
And I think it's striking to me that in a city like Metro Manila, you don't really have any public spaces, no? I mean, like you don't have any parks, for example. It doesn't seem to be very
There are few.
family friendly. I mean,
True.
like people go to malls, but again, this is of course I don't want to be out where it's hot, but it's also like you go there to essentially buy things or go to a restaurant
Or just
something,
enjoy
or
the,
just enjoy.
the air conditioning.
Yeah, or just enjoy that. But it's not made in the first place for for families, for example, to spend their time. It's a commercial project after all, right? So I don't know. It doesn't. So those aspects where the people would be more, the main concern, and not,
We're not there yet.
we're not there yet. Yeah,
We need
yeah,
more
yeah.
modernizing,
Yeah.
more modernizing policymakers in the local government, and also with the right orientation that is people-centered. Improving the quality of life, and even if you're not rich, the government can still do something that your quality of life will be improved, no? Like public spaces, no? Yeah, like what you said, and lessening the traffic, for example.
Yeah.
So it's double, triple, quadruple burden, no? Especially for poor people. So it's all also in orientation, and then the planning framework, and then so hopefully.
Yeah, many challenges, but I mean, like, it seems like, well, you've got a good team. You also, like you said, you're partnering with other good organizations, so you have, you know what to do, I think, and
Hopefully.
yeah, and of course, I mean, with those kind of huge challenges, you have to break them down into doable small steps
Yeah.
in order to have to have some successful, at least partial achievements along
True.
the way. Otherwise, it's just too overwhelming, I guess. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, it's been great talking to you.
Thank
you
you
very
also.
much. It's been really insightful for me, and I'm wishing you best of luck
Thank you.
for the foreseeable future. A lot on your plate, but I'm sure. Well, you're a fighter, and I wish you best of luck.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
FES will still be with us next year for the continuing of the social city, so we'll be together in that journey.
That sounds good.
Thank you,
Perfect.
Johannes.
Thank you
All
very
right.
much, Arlene. All right. We didn't cover really
I think we covered it.
the main points.
Yeah.
That's good. No, I think that was quite good.